Okay, hello everybody. Let me make sure that's working. Great. Hello and welcome back to another live lesson with me, Mr. C, and my biology. Great to see you, everyone, as well. I hope you've had a good day. It continues to be a funny old world of teaching online in my life. But yeah, I thought about maybe doing a vlog of what it's like to teach in an online environment where the school is empty and there are just teachers chatting into Zoom everywhere you walk. But yeah, so it's a weird old world. Great to see some people on the chat. Hello everyone, good morning to people who are in a different time zone. It's the afternoon for me, it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. Good to see Luke Maps. Wow, yeah, just like the good old days, Luke, back at my previous school. And yeah, hello to Matthew and Jasper and Casper and Keith and Onion as well. It's great to know that there are people called Onion out there. Welcome. We're going to talk about a few things. I think you just saw the plan. It should have been up on the screen briefly. So organisation is what we're going to talk about first, and then we're going to talk about digestion, structure of the digestive system, the functions of the digestive system, what does it do, and we'll hone in on a few little details in the last bit as well. So that's the plan for today. Wow, it's late for some of you, 23:30 for Peter apparently, and good to see you too, Noble YT, I assume that stands for YouTube, and for Sam as well, hello. Good to see you all. Great, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate people turning up and watching my live streams because yeah, it really does make a difference, hopefully for you to learn something, and it's nice to know for me as well that people are watching, people enjoy learning and finding out stuff about biology. Hello to Pink Panda as well. Well, let's get going with organisation then, because the concept of organisation is about how does our body get sorted out into different structures, how does everything work together, and there are different levels, and the key thing to remember is actually that most of them sound quite the same. They all have the same kind of root word, and they all have a definition that works in a similar way as well. But we'll work through that in just a moment. So organisation, we're going to start off with an organelle. So an organelle is a tiny little structure. You'll remember a couple of live streams ago, 2 weeks ago, we talked about what's inside a cell, and we talked about things like mitochondria, and we talked about ribosomes and the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus. So all of these are organelles. That's the technical name for that kind of group of things. And so an organelle is something that's inside a cell that has a job to do. And if we have lots of organelles working together, then that's what gives us a cell. And a cell is the smallest unique unit of life. So if we have an organelle by itself, it's not able to function well enough to be able to create something that we could call life, something that we could call living. Whereas if we have lots of organelles in a cell, then actually we can say that that cell is living. It can do the things that can survive. And so we get unicellular organisms. You think of bacteria and fungi, some fungi and some viruses as well. They're single cell organisms. They're living things, well maybe not viruses, but they're living things that can survive by themselves as one cell only. So you don't need anything else more than that to survive. But we do. So if we have more than one cell working together, especially similar types of cells, so you think you have a muscle cell, but if you have a few muscle cells together, then you can have a tissue. I almost got ahead of myself there. So a tissue is a group of similar cells working together in the same way that a cell is a group of similar organelles working together. Now if you have a group of tissues, maybe different tissues, different groups of cells that are going to be working together for a certain function, and that's what's going to get us an organ. And if we have lots of organs working together, if we imagine the digestive system, for example, where we've got the mouth, we've got the esophagus, we've got the stomach, we've got all sorts of different organs, when they all work together, we end up with an organ system. And so we can name a few different organ systems quite easily off the top of our head. We can probably think of the respiratory system, so the organs including the lungs and the mouth as well. And we can think of the circulatory system, where we've got the different blood vessels and we've got the heart. The nervous system, where we've got all the spinal cord, the brain, all the nerves that come off the spinal cord. And other systems as well are made up of lots of different organs that work together to have one kind of unified function. And if we have lots of organ systems together, so like we are made up of the organ systems of the respiratory system, the circulatory system, we've got all these different systems. When we make them all together, then that's when we can get an organism. Great, so an organism is a living thing, and so we are an organism. A human being is an organism, but also plants are organisms as well. And so we can think of the plant organ systems being things like they have a transport system, they have a reproductive system in their flowers and other things like that. Good, thank you, Jasper, for calling out nervous system as well in the chat. Do feel free to add things if I say something, feel free to add it in the chat. And hi to Louis as well in the comments. Good to see you. So all these different things you can see as we move along from an organelle to a cell to a tissue to an organ system and an organism. The key definition for each of these is just it's one of the earlier levels working together. So a tissue is cells working together. What's an organ? Well, it's tissues working together. What's an organ system? Well, it's organs working together. And as we go up further and further, the function that they're operating on, the thing that they're trying to achieve, becomes more and more complex. So a cell's function, if you think of a muscle cell by itself, might be just to contract that one little bit. And whereas if it's a tissue, then it might be to contract and move a whole thing. And then we think of the whole organ of a muscle, maybe the heart is an organ of lots of different tissues in different directions. That job is to pump blood. And then if we think of the system that the heart is within, well, actually it's to pump blood through the blood vessels to carry oxygen to different parts of the body. And then if we think of that in relation to the other organ systems, then that's going to work really well to keep us alive. Now, Noble YT has just asked which organs do plants have? So we talked about the fact that they've got some systems. In terms of organs, we can think of parts of the flower as being organs. So the stigma or the stamen, there are different organs within the flower. And if we think of the transport system, we've got the xylem and the phloem, and the different transport systems going through the plant. So the xylem carries water from the roots up to the leaves, and the phloem carries sugars from where they're made in the leaves all the way to where the sugars are going to be used. So it might be to the fruits, or it might be to a growing part of the plant. It might be to the roots that need them for respiration. It might be to something else. So I hope that answers your question. Do come back at me if there's something you want to add. That's absolutely fine. So hopefully that's okay. That's what organisation means about sorting out our body into different categories and making sure that everything works together and is in these different levels to make a really complex organism at the end of it. Now let's get into some digestion, because this is some of the interesting stuff. So what I did earlier is I drew as best I could a digestive system, because then I don't get any copyright claims for trying to pinch an image off the internet. So this is my digestive system that I've drawn, and there are just some quick simple things that we can add to it, and things that we'll probably know already. So we'll probably know that at the top we've got our mouth, and we might know that obviously our food is going to go to our stomach, but sometimes we kind of just point to our abdomen, our tummy area, and just say, oh yeah, my stomach hurts, when actually it might be that a different part of your digestive system is aching. It might not be your stomach in particular, but we often say my tummy, which is an abbreviation of stomach, and we kind of look at our whole digestive system. But actually it's just one part, it's one sac within it. As we go further down, we'll probably know we've got two types of intestines. So we've got some small intestines that are inside, and they are small because they're narrow. They're actually a lot longer than the large intestines, and the large intestine is over here. And can I spell this evening? Intestine, there we go. So we've got small intestine, large intestine. Now there are a few others that are a little bit more complicated, maybe harder to spell. So the food tube that takes food from the mouth to the stomach is called the esophagus. Now I'm going to spell it the British way, and then I'll tell you how to spell it the American way. In England we spell, hang on, it's got an O there, and it's got an O at the front in English. In British English. In American English, you don't have the O, and it just starts with an E for esophagus. But we would normally say an esophagus with an O at the front if you're from the UK. A few other bits we can add in. I can see that Jasper added the liver. We'll come onto the liver in a separate diagram later, actually, but I haven't added it to this one here. The kidneys, Jasper's also added. The kidneys aren't actually part of the digestive system because they are something that is involved instead in the urinary system. So they're going to be filtering out the blood. They're going to be removing urine and other kind of waste products that we're going to put into the urine and get rid of it. So the kidneys don't feature in this particular diagram. But what we do have is the pancreas here. The pancreas is a well, we'll go through functions in a moment, but it's a massive production of lots of different enzymes. And then this little section down underneath the stomach is the duodenum. My spelling is not quite on track today, but the duodenum is just a section of the small intestine, really. And we sometimes refer to the small intestine actually as the ileum, and then the large intestine as the colon. And so then we can be really precise about which part of the digestive system we're referring to. Now further down we have the rectum here. That's where feces is stored, and then the anus is the final part, and that is where feces is going to leave the body. So if we talk about some of the functions, the mouth obviously is going to break down food physically and chew on it. That's something that we all are quite used to. Most days we'll eat something and chew on it, unless you're on one of those juice diets, in which case you won't be chewing on much at all. Then the esophagus is going to lubricate food. I'll tell you what, I'll change colour pen, and then we can add in the functions. So it's going to lubricate food as it travels down to the stomach by producing lots and lots of mucus. And it produces this mucus from these amazing cells called goblet cells that release mucus into the food bolus that's been released the food bolus that's been left as it's chewed and swallowed. And then as we get down to the stomach, that's where some digestion is going to start to happen, some chemical digestion. Now, a common misconception is that the hydrochloric acid in the stomach starts to break down the food. But that is incorrect. In fact, the hydrochloric acid in the stomach is all about protection. It's about destroying bacteria and things like that might come into your body. So it's trying to prevent bacteria getting in, prevent bacteria causing any damage. So it's got hydrochloric acid. In fact, I'm just going to call it by its chemical name, HCl, for protection. But what it does have at this stage is that it has some enzymes. It has, in fact, some protease. In order to releases this protease, and this protease breaks down protein. So normally we can tell what an enzyme does by its name. So protease breaks down protein. If we have some carbohydrates, it breaks down carbohydrates. If we have some lipase, it breaks down lipids. And the pancreas is the place that releases all these sorts of enzymes. So the pancreas breaks down, it releases all the types of enzymes we can think of. So it releases lipases to break down lipids or fats, produces proteases in order to break down proteins, and also carbohydrates as well. Now actually we've got a carbohydrate, and we have a cat as well. There we go. We have carbohydrates. We have a specific type of name for carbohydrates, which is amylase in this case, which is just the type of carbohydrates. It's going to start off. No, you can't eat cardboard. That's not allowed. So sorry about that. That was Monty. So we have some amylase, and amylase just starts the process of breaking down carbohydrates into sugars. Now the mouth also releases this amylase as well in the saliva. So we might also add the salivary glands on in a different diagram and say that the saliva is where amylase starts some chemical digestion. That breaks down carbohydrates. Now the duodenum is the bit that receives all these different chemicals from the pancreas. This pancreatic fluid is going to break it down. And when we get further down into the large intestine, this is when we stop breaking down things so much and we start absorbing things. So the whole process of the digestive system is to break down stuff and then absorb it. So when food comes into our body, it's in these massive molecules that we can't just get into our body very easily. And so we need to break them down, chop them up into small parts, And once they're chopped up into small parts, then we can take them in, and then we can make sure that they are easily absorbed into our body so we can use them and make other things from them. So in our small intestine, that's where all the absorption of food molecules and nutrients come in. So the stuff that the pancreas has broken down, that then ends up being absorbed by the small intestine. Whereas the large intestine, that absorbs everything else, basically the water. So the small intestine absorbs food molecules, whereas the large intestine absorbs water. And so if you think of when someone has diarrhea, what's happening there is just the large intestine is not functioning properly. For some reason, it's just not absorbing any of the water, and so the feces, the poo at the end, ends up being full of water. The last two parts of the digestive system, we've got the rectum, that stores feces just before it's ready to go, and then the anus is where feces is released from and leaves the body. So that is our kind of overview of the digestive system and the structures, the things that are physically there in blue, and then their functions in orange as to what they do and how they do their job. As ever, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat or in the comments below, and that's absolutely fine. I'll get on to answering them as quickly as I can. If we scroll down, and now this is where, now Jasper mentioned earlier about the liver, this is where we've got the liver coming in as well. So this is what the liver looks like, and it's got a little bit that comes out of the liver, and that is the gallbladder. And the gallbladder, a bladder of any sort is a thing that will hold a liquid for a time, and so we normally think of the bladder that holds our urine for a time and then releases it, but in this case it's going to be something that holds gall, which is actually just an archaic name for bile. So bile is produced by the liver, and then it's stored in the gallbladder so it can be released at the right time. There we go, make sure you can see that. So it's produced by the liver, stored and released from the gallbladder. And now this is really interesting because if you think of the diet of a horse will just eat grass, it will nibble on grass most of the day. It doesn't have like set meal times, and so it doesn't need a gallbladder. We have a gallbladder so that when food comes through our body, then we can release this bile that's going to break down lipids. That's its job, I should have mentioned that. Whereas a horse that's eating all the day, just nibbling away, that doesn't need a gallbladder because actually it can just be nibbling all the day, it's eating all the time, and so it releases this bile steadily straight from the liver. It doesn't need to store it up and then release it at a mealtime because the horse doesn't have a mealtime quite in the same way that we do. Now, the other thing that is going to happen with this bile is it's going to neutralise some of the stomach acid. So if we just imagine, and I'll draw it in a different colour, we've got some stomach acid bubbling up here that's doing some great job at not breaking down food, remember, but in this case it's neutralising, it's destroying the bacteria. Then when it gets through here, we want to be able to neutralise it so that the rest of our body doesn't have to have all the protective lining that the stomach does to be able to protect it from this really strong acid. So in this case, bile is released that's slightly alkaline, and that neutralises the acidic acid from the hydrochloric acid from the stomach, and so we get a neutral solution that ends up going into the small intestine and eventually into the large intestine. Now that's really good because the enzymes that are going to work down there, things like the amylase and the protease and the lipase from the pancreas, they need to work in a kind of neutral environment, and so we need to make sure that the pH is neutralised as it comes out of the stomach so that by the time it's in the small intestine it is neutral. So the pH changes a little bit as it goes through, as you take a molecule of food through the digestive system. It's acidic in the stomach. It might be even slightly alkaline in the duodenum after it's been released, after the bile has been released from the gallbladder, and then hopefully it's neutralised and it's neutral at the end when it gets to the small intestine and all the way from there outwards. Now, if we zoom in on what an enzyme does and how an enzyme works, this is really interesting because these are tiny molecules. They're not cells, they're smaller than cells, they're just proteins, but they serve a really important function. What they do is they speed up chemical reactions. Now in this case we're going to talk about the chemical reaction of breaking down food from a large molecule to a small molecule. But they can also do things where they build up two molecules into one. They can speed up other reactions as well, and things to do with respiration and photosynthesis. Most reactions in your body would take place at a normal kind of pace, but if we have enzymes, then actually they can take place at a much faster rate. We can speed these sorts of things up, and that means that we are able to function as quickly and as efficiently as we do. Now let's just label a few key features on this enzyme. So we have an enzyme over here that I've drawn in blue, and the thing that the enzyme is going to bind to, I've drawn it as a kind of mushroom shape this time, is a substrate. And so the substrate is the thing that's going to be affected by the enzyme, and there's a section in the enzyme that's actually going to do the change, and that bit there is called the active site. And so actually we might say that this whole little layer inside there is the active site. The whole bit is going to be the bit that's going to grab onto the substrate and make a change. Now if we have a look, when we have an enzyme bound to a substrate, then that is an enzyme substrate complex. So it's an enzyme plus a substrate together. And I can't spell substrate, that's right. So it's an enzyme substrate complex, and they're bound together, and that's where the magic is going to happen. So once they're bound together, then this substrate is probably going to change shape because it's been put under pressure by this enzyme that's grabbed onto it. And then what's going to happen is it's going to release at the end and some new products. So these are going to be some products that are released. So for example, it could be that we take in a big molecule of starch, a molecule of starch that is really useful for us because it's going to give us lots of energy, but actually it's really hard to get at because we really want the sugars that the starch is made up of. And it might be a long chain of sugars that are in one big starch molecule. And so an enzyme might come along, something like amylase, and will bind onto a section of that starch molecule, and it will break apart the bonds that are in there, the bonds that are holding the starch all together. They're called glycosidic bonds, and it's going to end up with it in lots of different glucose molecules. And so what started off as a big starch molecule ends up with lots of different glucose molecules all separately because it's been broken down by this enzyme. And so this product is going to be released, and then the enzyme is stayed the same, and it can bind onto another part of the starch. It can jump onto it and can break it apart and then move on to another part. And so the enzyme is always the same. It never gets used up. It doesn't kind of run out of energy. It just does it again and again and again. Now, if we look at what might change the enzyme activity, so here we've got a graph and enzyme activity. If it's something is really high on our graph, and that means that lots of enzyme activity is happening, it's happening really quickly. If it's low, it means it's working really slowly. There we go. So enzymes work in different pHs. So for example, if I have an enzyme that's designed to work in the stomach, then when we have a pH of maybe 1 or 2 or 3, it's going to find itself working really well. Whereas if we go up to something more like 7 or even a pH 14, something that would be alkali or basic, and that's going to be something that's where the enzyme's going to struggle. So we can see here where does it work best, what's its optimum pH? Well, it's just around 2-ish. Whereas if we go any more than 3 or any lower than 1, then it's not going to work at all. And so that most enzymes will have this optimum pH where they will work. If we think of enzymes that will work in the small intestine and released from the pancreas maybe, they're probably going to have an optimum pH that's about around 7, around neutral, because remember we've got our bile coming in that's going to neutralise the stomach acid and end up a neutral substance in the small intestine. If we look at temperature, there's a similar sort of pattern, and so we can increase the temperature that the enzyme is working on, and we can kind of see how it works, see if it works faster, see if it works slower. Now normally molecules move faster when we give them more temperature, so we'd expect that an enzyme actually, as we increase the temperature, it will increase its activity, and it does up to a point because this enzyme is moving faster, it's running around, it's breaking more bonds over here, more bonds over there, this starch molecule is getting broken down into sugars as quickly as it possibly can, and that happens all the way up to a certain point. And then the molecules are moving so fast, actually even the molecules inside the enzyme start to break down. And so the enzyme activity drops right down. because this enzyme itself can't cope with the temperature, and so the enzyme starts to split up as parts of the enzyme are moving really fast and other parts are moving fast in a different direction, and this enzyme denatures. And so if an enzyme is denatured, then that means that it can't work again. Even if I then cool down this enzyme and say, it's okay, come back, I love you, I'm sorry that I heated you up so much, then it still won't work. And an example of this, where we can see it quite obviously, is if we heat up an egg. So a fried egg, for example, it starts off with this clear albumin, this protein that is in the egg, the white of the egg we call it, but actually it really turns white when we heat it up too much. If we heat it up too much, it becomes denatured. It can't get back into its denatured state. It can't fix itself again. Actually, we've broken apart this protein. It's formed a white fried egg, and that's it. You're done. You can't undo that. And so it's an irreversible reaction in this case. What your body can do is, if we denature a protein, is it can then actually kind of chop it up and reuse it and make another protein, copying some DNA. But it's not as straightforward. You have to actually break apart a protein and make a new one. You can't just fix the one that's been denatured. Now, a key thing we need to say is that it doesn't die. Enzymes don't die, and the reason for that is that we said earlier they're made of protein. Okay, if they're just made of protein, they're not alive. And things that are alive can die. Things that aren't alive in the first place, they can't die. And so it can denature, and that just means it loses its nature, it loses its shape. And so if we looked at this enzyme that we've got up here, if we were to draw a denatured version, then in fact, let me copy and paste it and see what happens. So if we were to draw a denatured version, then what would happen is we'd lose the most important part of the enzyme. The other bits of the enzyme might change shape, but ultimately, if the active site changes shape, this one here, if that has broken, if that's distorted, then our substrate won't fit in, or it won't fit in the way that's going to hold it and break it, and so it's not going to make our products. And so if we think of our enzyme and our active site and our substrate, here they fit in really nicely. They fit like a lock fits into a key. That's often an analogy we use. Whereas if we heat it up too much, it's not going to fit. It's going to have this denatured active site. Remember, it's not dead because it's not alive in the first place, but it's denatured, and so it can't carry out its function in the first place. So just a kind of few key points on our enzymes. They aren't used up, and they're made of protein. And when we heat them up or put them in extreme pHs, they're going to denature. They're not going to die as such. That is what I thought we could round up and finish on for today. So just as a kind of overview, what we've talked about is we've talked about organisation, about how cells build together and have organisms, but actually there are lots of different levels of that. Lots of cells working together to make a tissue, lots of tissues to make an organ, organs to make an organ system, and that makes a living organism in itself. And then we talk through the digestive system, the different ways that we get food broken down, and then we can absorb it and make the most of it in our body. And we talked briefly about enzymes as well and how they work. There's lots more to say on this topic, so I'm happy to take any questions if you want to pop them in the comments. But other than that, it's been really great to see you guys, and it's been great to have some people come and watch. Thank you so much. What I'll do, as ever, is I will put some bookmarks on the video this evening, so that then you can see on different parts of it where I'm talking about different topics. And I'll also add the PDF of the notes that I've been drawing and writing as we've gone through. So if you do want something to look back on, it's the same on the previous videos that I've done, the live lessons, the notes that are there in the PDF form, and the video has been bookmarked so you can easily find the topics that you might want to go over again. If you have found this helpful, then you can buy me a coffee to show your appreciation. You don't have to. I'm a full-time teacher, so I do have a wage. But yeah, it's a nice way to show me that you appreciate these videos. There's a link in the description, and you're very welcome to do that if you found this helpful and if you found it interesting. But thank you so much for watching. It's been great, and I'll be back next week with another video. We'll wait and see what it's going to be. I imagine, judging by what's next on my list, it's probably going to be heart and lungs and the blood system. But I have got a few videos on that already, so I might leave it and then go to something else. I'll work it out and I'll let you know. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, guys. You know what? I've only just checked the YouTube chat, and I've seen there are some extra questions, and I thought I'd just add a little sneak preview at the end if you're still here. So if someone said, what would happen if someone hits your liver, like they punch your liver, what the effects be? So your liver probably gets damaged more by things like drinking alcohol regularly in excessive amounts, because your liver is all about breaking down poisons in your body and keeping your blood as clean as possible. And so punching your liver might damage its effects quite badly, and might mean that you can't process those sorts of things and make bile. It does all sorts of things to your liver. It's a processing plant and all sorts of stuff. Some other people have said, so enzymes are all specific to the organ they're in. You do get kind of great categories of enzymes. So when we talk about lipases, they break down lipids in general. But actually, we get specific types of lipases that break down lipids in special ways. Some people have gone to bed, that's absolutely fine. And Jasper said, how long does it take to digest the food? Well, the process of breaking it down, that's the real digestion bit rather than absorption. It doesn't take very long at all for a molecule of starch to get chopped up into little bits of sugar. But in order for food to go all the way from the top to the bottom, pun intended, means that actually it will take a few hours. Sometimes you might eat a big meal and feel like you need to go to the loo straight away. It's not necessarily linked. It's just the fact that your body's realised that actually there's things coming through. It does take a few hours for things to properly get all the way through. I think that's it. I'm just going to check the YouTube channel comments one more time because I don't want to miss any more questions. Sorry about that. But that is now it. And we'll call it a day. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.